Hey everybody, welcome to the Flame Trench, the post-Thanksgiving Day edition. I'm your host tonight, Gene Rowley. Tonight on the Flame Trench, we're going to talk all about the road to Starship version 2. You're going to get a lot of great information on that. We're also going to talk about some New Glenn. It goes up, it goes down, it goes up again. We'll talk about, are they going to launch before the end of the year? Also, some Starlink regulatory information and Dragonfly on tonight's Flame Trench.
And here we go. We have liftoff. Propulsion continues to be normal.
RCPA chamber pressure looks good.
Following up. Roger, roll, Atlantis.
Water towers fly! Yes! Echo down to nominal.
Flight downside FD off. Bring in FD off. It's orange!
145! Oh my god! Oh my god!
Decollage.
Look at this!
Put that in the big bag, Eagle.
343 unfolds to go. Indeed.
We rise together back to the moon and beyond.
The methane will be igniting in the flare, correct?
Yikes. You read? Sure. We don't need any more of these.
Welcome in, everybody, to the Flame Trench post-Thanksgiving Day edition. Hope everybody had a great time with family and friends. If you celebrate Thanksgiving, happy Thanksgiving. If you don't, happy Thanksgiving. Welcome to the Flame Trench. Tonight, our co-hosts, you know them. They had an amazing interview with Raul Torres from PLD Space the other day. Go watch that after this. Just some friends of ours at NSF. Look, Dee's there. And then Alex, you just had D, then Alex. We've got the one and only D Wise and Alex joining us tonight on the Flame Trench. And we have got a lot of great stuff to talk about. Of course, get your questions in the chat at NASASpaceflight. And be sure to, get us some great questions. Tonight, guys, we're going to be talking about Starship. We're going to be talking about Dragonfly. We're going to talk about Starlink. We're going to talk about New Glenn, what's going on there. So be sure to get those questions in. D, how are you? Haven't talked to you in a while.
I'm doing really well. It's been a great week, as you mentioned. We had the interview with PLD Space earlier this week. We had Thanksgiving yesterday, and it's been a great week, and I'm happy to be here in the Flame Trench.
Well, we're glad you're here to talk about all kinds of good rocket goodness. Alex, how are you?
Well, I'm still recovering from my first time hosting a live stream, I guess. But that interview, I was kind of nervous all the time, to be fair. I was kind of thrown to the wolves, so to speak. But I was also proud, that we had at least a piece of my country, I guess, here on NSF on that live stream. As we mentioned on that, it's a new series of NSF Live, right? So if you've not heard about it, now you're hearing about it here on the Flame Trench. We had that interview, the first interview with Raul Torres from PLD Space, Payload Space, here from Spain. You can see there that part where we talk about me, signing one of the rockets that launched last year. And so, it's part of the series that we're calling sort of Europe's future in space. There's a bunch of companies coming up in Europe that are, having lots of interesting plans ahead, and to make them more, giving them a space to be able to talk about all of that. We thought it was a neat thing to do. And so that's that interview. After the Flame Trench, you might want to check that out if you haven't done so.
I highly recommend it. I was in the chat for the whole thing, the interview. You did great, Alex. D, you did as well. And, listening to Raul talk about the future of PLD Space and what they're looking to do in that marketplace is really, really good. You guys both did a great job. Guys, be sure to show us some support in the chat. We love you. We appreciate that. And I just want to mention, if you're like me and you pre-ordered your Flight 6 patch, I just want to let everybody know that those should be shipping. Those are scheduled to ship the first week of December. So we who pre-ordered are all going to get our patches at the same time. So looking forward to that. As we said, as we come in, we're going to talk about Starship. We're going to talk about Starlink and New Glenn. But there was some big news this week about Dragonfly. I said Firefly earlier. Dragonfly. And if you don't know what Dragonfly is, it's one of NASA's upcoming milestone missions. I mean, we've been waiting for this one ever since they announced it, going back to Saturn's moon Titan, and this is actually building on the success of the Ingenuity helicopter that we all saw fly many times past its life, by the way, on Mars. And I want to talk about the vehicle itself and why this is such a big deal, because they just announced that it's going to fly on the Falcon Heavy, right, Alex?
Yeah, and this is a very big deal, right? Because Dragonfly. So first of all, it's this big mission to Titan, the largest moon of Saturn. And so one of the interesting things of this mission is, first of all, it's interesting, in the scientific value of it. It's a very highly valuable mission because of where it is going and the things that it is doing. It is going to, again, the largest moon of Saturn. And the neat thing about that location, Titan has a very thick atmosphere. It has a lot of carbon chemistry, hydrocarbons, like methane and things like that, right? It has rivers and lakes of methane. Like, this is something that we saw with Cassini. And, ESA, along with the Cassini, there was this sort of probe that was called the Huygens probe, which landed on Titan. And we learned some of, about Titan a little bit here and there, but we didn't really fully understand, things like the geology. Like, there, water is so cold, it's ice, but it's also rock. It's literally part of the moon's surface, right? And so it all of that geology, the atmosphere, why is it so thick? It's about 1.5 times the pressure of here in the Earth, right? And so it's a very interesting moon. It has a lot of interesting things to, just look at it and understand. Because a lot of the things that we might see there, we can probably correlate that with how the Earth began. It was also a very thick atmosphere, rich in hydrocarbons and things like that. It was not as rich, perhaps, in oxygen and things like that. So that's one of the things that they want to understand. This is also a very different way of exploring a vehicle, an object in space, I should say. This vehicle, the Dragonfly spacecraft, is a rotorcraft. Essentially, just like we had Ingenuity on Mars, but instead now on a proper atmosphere on Titan. And this is like multiple. It has 4 motors, and each motor has 2 rotors assemblies and things like that. So it has lots of redundancies so that it doesn't suffer the usual, what we saw, for example, with Ingenuity. It's a lot easier to fly as well in Titan's atmosphere because it's low gravity, thick atmosphere. It's really, really easy to fly there. And so it's going to have things like a mass spectrometer. It's going to have a little drill that is going to, take up some of that soil and investigate that, because in between flights it's got to land, right? And so that's one of the things that it's going to be doing. It's going to scout locations around Titan to be able to look up for good science locations. And this is one of the great values of this mission, right? But it's also very expensive. So that's the other big deal. I'll talk about the third big deal just in here a moment. This mission started as sort of the 4th mission of the Frontiers program for NASA. And this is one of these science programs which is essentially with a cost cap of about $1 billion, but it's about 800 million for the mission and about 200 million for the launch, so a total of about $1 billion. However, currently the mission is $3.35 billion, or so it is expected to be at the end of it. So it's a lot more expensive than we thought. It was also delayed multiple times. First, because of COVID-19 shenanigans, right? We had this sort of supply chain shortage and things like that. And then after that, budget concerns and things like that. It was supposed to launch first in 2026. Then it was delayed to 2027. And then follow on to that to 2028. We talk about a lot of this in this week in Spaceflight, which will be going live after the Flame Trade. So do check that out. So that's the two big deal parts of, like, Falcon Heavy is launching this kind of mission. It's a very big deal mission. But there's a third reason why this is a big deal, and it is because Titan does not get a lot of sunlight, right? So you cannot just send a big rotorcraft with, with solar panels or anything. Ingenuity had a solar panel, but this cannot have a solar panel. So what it does have instead is an RTG, a radioisotope thermal electrical generator, aka it's just a device that uses the thermal decay of, the thermal radiation from the decay of plutonium. I think it's 238, and so it uses that to drive, to charge batteries and things like that, and with that it can fly around Titan. That, however, means that this rocket that we're seeing here on screen, Falcon Heavy, needs to be certified to carry that nuclear material. And now, this is one of those things that, we've seen other rockets already launching probes with nuclear material. We've seen Titan, we've seen Atlas, right? Those rockets have already done that. They have already gone through all of that. Vulcan is also starting to go through that certification as well, because it's being certified to fly the Draco experiment for NASA. That is this sort of reactor in nuclear propulsion kind of experiment. But this will be the first time for a SpaceX rocket for Falcon Heavy, and it's not fully specified what kind of steps they go through, but there's a set of requirements. And actually, the Trump administration in 2019 refreshed some of these approval process, so to speak, this sort of recertification process in 2019, because the last time this had been done was in 1995, ahead of the Cassini launch, which was a long time ago. So there's this tiered process, so to speak, in which, depending on how much fissile material, if you carry X amount, then you have to go through, Y pathway, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's a lot more streamlined now in that sense. And so, one of the things that we'll have to see, of course, is for this mission where it lands on. But either way, it needs to go through this certification. This is going to be the first time for a SpaceX Falcon Heavy rocket, or any SpaceX rocket. So it's a big deal, right? And I'm hoping that this is a step for SpaceX in the future to be able to also launch this kind of stuff on Starship, because then we'll have a lot of interesting payloads that you can launch with nuclear propulsion or nuclear, materials inside, like an RTG, bigger RTG, who knows, multiple RTG on board Starship to very distant destinations. You can think of many, many different destinations. But that's my long, discussion and talk about all of this, I guess.
And no timer. You can just go as long as you want, and we love it. Guys, we want to thank some folks in chat. Thank you so much, Mats, for gifting some, becoming a Red Team member. We also want to thank Mighty Dawn for gifting 10 memberships. Thank you so much for that. And yes, somebody asked earlier, that is one of the 3D printed Raptor 3 models right there. My cat knocked it off the other day, and it scared the death out of me that I broke it. I did not break it. Speaking of Dragonfly, we've got some questions in the chat already for you, Alex. Here is a good one. Could NASA feasibly make a rover or drone that uses methane in situ? Because we know Titan has methane lakes, methane oceans. It's basically the solar system gas station, if you think about it. Do you, in your futuristic brain, think that that's something they could do?
Well, one of the problems of, just using methane, of course you can just use methane, but how do you use it, right? If you're talking about, burning it with oxygen, then you need that oxygen, right? Or some kind of other oxidizer, I don't know, hydrogen peroxide or whatever you can come up with. But you need to find that, right? Of course, as I was just saying, there's a lot of water, right? On Titan, we've seen that there's these sort of, materials of I'm seeing now that video. It's so funny. But yeah, like, you could, in theory, just turn that water into hydrogen and oxygen, even use just the water, like don't even need to use the methane. You can use the hydrogen and oxygen, but then you need a way to be able to split. You need an energy source to split the oxygen from the hydrogen on the water. Like you still need some energy from outside because it's not as easy to just grab some oxygen. I believe there's no free oxygen in Titan's atmosphere or even on the ground because it's so cold again that methane is liquid, right? You could essentially just fill up a starship and you will be okay with that, I guess. But you will not have a pure source of pure oxygen essentially. So you will need some sort of oxidizer. But I don't know. We'll see. Like that's one of the things that this mission will enable, right? 'Cause we're gonna go there. We're gonna investigate. We'll see what's out there. And so this is one of the things that I've been doing this week in spaceflight already for almost 2 years. It's gonna be 2 years a few months from now. And every single time we feature some science stuff. This week we wanted to have also like the Ryugu. It was Ryugu or the other one. Whatever. One of the asteroid sample missions. They had opened accidentally one of those, and then bacteria grew on the sample. And so, that's one of the things that always fascinates me, right? That we can discover all of these weird things, planetary science, astrophysics science, heliophysics, whatever, right? All of these different things, just because we go out there, we look, see what's up there, what happens, and then we learn a lot of stuff. What is going on here? We learned that, I don't know, bacteria can survive in just pure asteroid material, right? It's like, of course they can, because it's bacteria. But anyway,
Space bacteria. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't wait. I can't wait. Just watching the video that came back from Huygens when it descended through the atmosphere, and it's a tiny little camera, big convex lens, and it showed the mountains and it descending down into that lake bed. If you haven't seen the Huygens video, it's pretty crazy. But on your screen right now, you're seeing what Dragonfly is going to do. The intent of this mission is to utilize that thick atmosphere, those counter-rotating blades, and that cool little hovercraft, little rotorcraft, just fly around on the surface of Titan and gather science for the next mission to Titan. And we do have a question about Titan. Bill wanted to know, what is the gravity? What is Titan's gravity? And I can answer that one. Here on Earth, 9.8 meters per second squared. And on Titan, it's about 1.3 meters per second, give or take a little bit. So it's a low gravity, thick atmosphere. Those blades don't have to turn as fast as the little Ingenuity did on Mars's thin atmosphere. And they had to get the high RPMs to get that thing to fly. But this thing will just take off. It should take off and land rather easily. Now, granted, it's the size of a Volkswagen. We're not talking about a small helicopter. We're talking about an enormous rotorcraft flying around on the moon of Saturn, which is just mind-blowing.
Yeah, that thing is going to be
crazy.
Enclosed in this capsule that is 3.7 meters in diameter, and it's going to be cozy there. Like, it's not going to be roomy or anything. It's going to be very tight inside of that re-entry capsule. So, yeah, and that's 3.7 meters in diameter of a capsule for re-entry, which is more or less the diameter of Dragons, for example. The diameter of Dragon. So, yeah.
And speaking of something else that's tight, we're coming up on the holiday season. We just finished Thanksgiving. Look at that. That's called a professional segue, by the way. Guys, go and check out the Black Friday deals. If you go to shop.nasaspaceflight.com, you'll see the banner at the top. What we're doing this year at shop.nasaspaceflight.com is bundles, right? So there's different bundles. You get discounts for bundles. Prints, hoodies, the shirts. You can click the banner at the top of the screen. There it is. Look at that beautiful patch. And this, by the way, this Black Friday sale ends Sunday. So now's the time to do it. And I was told that these purchases for the Black Friday bundles will be delivered before the Christmas holiday. So get out there and show us some support. That way, we love you. We thank you. The shirts are awesome. And all of us that pre-ordered a patch, again, that's scheduled to start shipping the first week of December. Let's see. Good chat questions coming in. Let's shift gears and talk a little bit about New Glenn, because we saw New Glenn get rolled out. And Dee, I'm going to come to you on this one. Get rolled out to LC-36. We're expecting some static fire, but they stood it up. And we all sat and watched. And then they laid it down. And now we're all wondering what's going on. So what's going on?
Yeah, so we saw New Glenn roll out to LC-36 a couple of weeks ago, and then they brought it vertical. We know that they need to do a static fire of the first stage, and they're doing that static fire with a fully integrated vehicle. So they have the actual second stage on top of there,
Mhm.
and they're going to static fire the first stage. We know they want to do that, but they had it vertical, then they took it horizontal again, and then they took it vertical again. So I would hope relatively soon we'll be able to see a static fire test uh, of the booster. So you're telling me there's a chance. Um, Blue Origin has really been pushing to launch this year. As far as whether or not that's actually going to happen, seems a bit unlikely at this point. It's kept sort of pushing back and pushing back. And like I said, they have to get that static fire done. They have to make sure everything's good before they launch that dark sky blue ring prototype of avionics equipment. So, of course, our Cape Cams have been keeping an eye on the launch pad as the rockets rolled out, went vertical, and back and forth. So, we would expect like late December for a launch at the absolute earliest, more likely like early January that they'll actually be able to launch New Glenn. But again, we're just going to have to wait and see. And this is an important step for New Glenn so that they're able to launch national security space launches for the NSSL contracts. So they've been making progress. We saw one of my favorite things about this booster is the forward and aft section are like unpainted. And so there we go. That's an excellent shot that Max got of this booster. I was able to see it roll by the press site early in the morning. Max went out there on a boat to get these shots of the vehicle vertical on LC-36. So as of now, we're sort of just waiting for any sort of official updates from the company on when this launch is going to happen.
And when it launches, they've got the drone ship named after his mom out in the Atlantic, and they're going to go for, like SpaceX did with Flight 6. They're going to go for a catch. They're going to go for a landing. And so you're telling me there's a chance, right?
Yeah, so they have
but-
Jacqueline.
yeah,
It's
go ahead.
currently in Port Canaveral, so it'll go out into the ocean for a vertical landing, a lot like Falcon 9 does, but the leg configuration is very different. I know our fleet cam captured, they have like a landing leg simulator on the deck of the ship. So they definitely have a bit of a different methodology than SpaceX. With SpaceX, we saw a whole bunch of tests where they knew they were going to have failures with Starship. And whereas with Blue Origin and New Glenn here, like they're gunning for just landing on that first attempt. We see they did bring a simulator out to Port Canaveral because they have a whole breakover fixture there. So that's going to be a bit different from the sort of way SpaceX does their operations. But they have a whole mechanism in order to bring the booster horizontal right in Port Canaveral before they basically will truck it back up to the facilities for reuse.
And are we looking at, conceivably, are we looking at a New Glenn launch before the end of 2024, or you think they're going to push this into 2025?
It's a really good question. So as far as we know, they don't have like an FAA license quite yet. So there's that. There's the static fire. So they basically have 1 month if they want to make it this year, and it's unlikely, I would say. But regardless of whether it makes the this year mark, they're all put together. They're all ready. So hopefully early January at the latest, if not hopefully sooner. But yeah, it definitely seems unlikely that they'll have a launch of New Glenn this year.
And if it is early January, then we'll start talking about other things. Later in the Flame Trench, we'll talk about what's coming up. Apparently, sometime early next year. Um, they have a different concept at Blue Origin. I was looking at this Blue Ring avionics launch device they have. I don't know what to call it because it's not a ride share. It's like cloud computing. Hey, there's Alex. Cloud computing, fuel depot. This Blue Ring thing is beyond like ride. It's like rideshare 2.0, right, D?
Yeah, it certainly seems about it. I think Alex is a bit more of an expert on the payload here than
Blue
myself.
Ring?
Yes,
Just throwing it to me.
yeah, I'll throw it right to you, Alex, if you can talk about that a bit more.
But yeah, one of the things that Blue Ring, it's like this sort of all-in-one kind of platform that they are trying to build. It's like a weird mix of trying to fit what SpaceX does with Transporter and combining a bit what Rocket Lab, for example, does with Photon, or rather, I think it's now changed the name or whatever. They have like this series of different names now, which I don't remember because it's very confusing. I'll keep calling it Photon because,
Like how you
he
did
announced it as Photon originally. So that's the only thing that I can remember now. I'm an old guy, I guess, in that sense. But yeah, it's like it's sort of trying to combine that, and they also think it could do things like communications and things like that. They've tried to bid for Blue Ring being sort of like a platform as a communications satellite and things like that. They have a lot of these different plans for Blue Ring, most of which kind of sound like it's an all-in-one kind of thing. But we'll see. We'll see. I'm a bit, fully skeptical. No, but a bit. I am about all of the. It's gonna do so. We'll see. They definitely have the money to be able to develop.
Yeah, definitely have the money.
A founder with deep pockets, but
that's well, that's a conversation for another flame trench. They also have a different concept when it comes to reusability. They're not shooting for direct reusability of the upper stage. Bezos just kind of wants to see what happens, right? So this is going to be partially reusable, only the first stage, right?
Yeah, so they'll be landing the first stage, and I believe my understanding is that they've sort of had two different teams working between an expendable upper stage and a reusable upper stage, and they just are figuring out where the data leads them. If they can get the cost of the expendable upper stage low enough, there's no point in trying to bother with reusing that upper stage, whereas if they figure out the reusability, then they might as well reuse it for payloads that don't require quite as much performance. So they're sort of just figuring out the trade-offs there.
We have some other Blue Origin news this week with the launch of their NS-28 mission on New Shepard as well. Carried some folks up into space and brought them back. They had touched down in Texas. It was 10 minutes after liftoff. And then one of the folks that went up was Emily Caladrelli, host of Emily's Wonder Lab, right? Which makes her the 100th woman in space, which we all think is awesome. More people in space, more better, right, Jack? D, tell us about this launch. Why was this a big deal?
Yeah, so they've sort of been working on an upgraded New Shepard vehicle, but they had flown it previously, but now they have taken 6 more people into space. It's not quite the same as the orbital vehicle, like going with Dragon. They have a couple minutes of weightlessness as they go across the Kármán line, but this is an example of like a reusable both spacecraft and booster. The booster touches down 10 minutes after liftoff. The capsule has its own mechanisms, landing under parachutes and with sort of cushioning system.
Yeah, it's like it is interesting how it comes down. There's like this explosion underneath, which actually drastically slows the spacecraft under parachute before it hits the ground. it looks very weird. It does not look like it's a fun ride at all. But I would do it, Jeff, if you're
Oh
watching.
yeah,
I'd do it.
the capsule kicks up a lot of dust in the West Texas desert as
Yeah.
it goes into landing. That's because it's throwing its exhaust basically right into the dirt, and so it kicks up that dust in order to soften the landing compared to what you would get off of purely a parachute based landing.
It is an interesting design. I'm not going to talk about its shape, but after it lets the capsule go, it has that ring of aero brakes on the top that that fold out, similar to the hypersonic grid fins on Falcon 9. Obviously, not going as fast, but that slows it down, but also allows it to fly back to its landing site. And then the proof of concept for the legs on New Glenn were the expandable or retractable landing legs. And this vehicle, the New Shepard, does something. Are they going to hover New Glenn like they do New Shepard? Does it have the thrust to weight ratio? I'm assuming it does. It's coming back almost empty and it's got more engines. This one just is very light, right? It comes down and it hovers over the launch, the recovery site, landing zone, right?
Yeah, they've got a different sort of landing. So with just to throw it to Starship, actually, real quick, we saw how much the booster slowed down in Flight 5 before it went over to the chopsticks, and it didn't quite hover, but it's always going to be a trade-off because they're not going orbital with New Shepard. They have extra propellant. They can afford to hover it, slow it down, then slowly lower it in place. I'm not sure as far as New Glenn whether they are going to try to hover it quite like that, but that's a trade-off in performance. And over the years, we've seen the way that Falcon 9's reentry has gone on a steeper and a higher speed reentry profile because by timing it out just perfectly for landing the thrust exactly as they need, they can maximize the amount of performance they had. And they were able to move from Dragon missions, which were initially RTLS, then they went to Dragon 2, and they had to be drone ship missions. And then eventually, due to that change in profile, they were able to move back to RTLS missions.
I
Yeah.
would ride that. Alex, would you go up on New Shepard?
Oh boy, I'm not a person that likes flying. So sometimes people ask me, "Oh, you're covering space because you want to go to space," and I'm like, "Nope, I just find it cool." But I'll cheer everybody that goes up into space and everything. I'll clap and hey, go ahead or whatever. But not for me.
Not you. Not you.
If-
Adrian neither. Adrian wouldn't go either.
Yeah, if I were that kind of person, I'd probably ride on New Shepard. It seems like it's a very safe vehicle in terms, like
Mm-hmm.
there's being like multiple abort tests of the abort system. They have also had a failure and it worked during flight, so it seems like it's a very safe system in that sense. But I'm not made to fly. I've flown multiple times on airplanes, and I still get like this sort of whenever it takes off or we're about to land. It's like, so yeah, not for me.
Dee, what about you? Would you take a ride on a New Shepard?
Oh, 100%. There's not a space faring vehicle I wouldn't go on. I would fly on Unity. I would fly on Delta.
Mhm.
I would fly on New Shepard, Dragon, Soyuz. Like, I would absolutely.
I'm kind of the same way. I know. Chat, what do you think? Would you fly? Would you fly? Pick a vehicle. Let's go. Jeff, if you're watching, we know you're watching. Dee and I are going. Let's go. New Shepard.
Let's
Or
do it.
anything. We'll fly anything. We'll fly anything. I want to thank some folks. Element 115, thank you for becoming a new Capcom member. We appreciate your support. Keep the questions coming in at NASASpaceflight in the chat. We're gonna get to those when we can. We are going to talk Starship a little bit later in the Flame Trench, so we'll get to those Starship questions when we get there. But there's a couple New Glenn questions that came in. Someone was asking about Escapade. With how long New Glenn is taking, do you think they will integrate and launch Escapade before the close of the window? I'm going to send that one to Alex. You watch these launches, these schedules, like nobody I've ever met. What do you think?
I don't know. To be fair, I think right now Escapade is somewhere around spring of next year, sort of like April, more or less. So
Hmm.
I don't know. I guess if it takes a long, long time to get Blue Origin, New Glenn off the pad, then they might. But I see it more like maybe Flight 2 of the rocket kind of thing.
Hmm. We're watching the new Shepard come in. It's such an interesting because right now inside the top little piece there's 6 people floating around going ooh ah taking pictures, and they're above the Kármán line, so they're in space. But there's some controversy. People are like, ah, yeah, did you really go to space? Did you? I mean, they're above the Kármán line, and if that's the measure, then the answer is yes, right? I love watching this booster land. By the way, I could watch boosters land all day long. This thing comes screaming back and then lights its engines. It does a suicide burn. So you can see at the top of it, the brake things deploy after the capsule's gone. I'd fly. I'd fly anything. I'm with you, D. But yeah, it comes down and then it hovers and then it kind of moves over the landing pad. Really interesting. Thank you guys so much for that.
I was going to say, there are people that will probably fly on the booster.
Oh, I would
Not even on the
totally fly on the
capsule.
booster.
See?
I would
See
fly
what I
on a
said?
Falcon 9 booster. I would fly on a New Shepard booster.
Hey, look at those
They've
brakes.
landed enough here.
You can see them opening, right? They open around the top. That to me, the physics and the engineering that goes into these are just incredible. There's the landing burn, and then it looks like it's just going to smack into the ground. Landing legs come out. Now watch what happens. Look at that.
It just hovers there.
It just hovers
so
there
long.
yeah. It's still hovering, and then it comes down. Falcon 9 does not do that. It comes down, turns the engines on, lowers the landing legs, and just hits the ground. There's no hover. Now, Starship, the super heavy booster, it can sit there for a minute, chopsticks close in. You'd ride that? I don't know if I would ride that on the way down. I'll stick to my parachutes.
I wouldn't ride a Starship booster quite
No,
yet.
no.
No.
out to the Gulf of Mexico for the
Do
explosion.
you want to have a splash?
I would need my own parachute.
We actually have a question. We have a question about Booster 13. We'll talk about that in a little bit when we get there. So yeah, New Glenn, up, down, up. We're waiting for a static fire. Probably not going to see a launch this year. Early next year is what we're all kind of thinking. The way it's going, they're taking their time. Do you think they're going to paint the rest of the vehicle? Or they're just going to let it ride the way it is?
This one, absolutely not. It's going to fly with its unique design. I like the way it looks. The fore and aft section look really different depending on the light and angle that you're looking at them. I know,
that's the photographer in you. We normal people who are not photographers are like, why is it brown?
Yeah, it's really unique. We're getting different designs. I know, like Vulcan, we are getting different paint designs. Paint is a surprisingly big thing in spaceflight. SpaceX is moving away from it with Starship. It adds a lot of weight. It decreases your payload capacity, and so unless it's like necessary, why deal with it in some regards? And so here it's like, why bother painting it? They've got the rest of the rockets already painted, so what's the point in covering up the unique style of this first launch?
I think it looks kind of cool too. I like the rustic look of it. Plus, paints, no paint saves weight. And when it comes down to it, it's all about mass to orbit for these companies and getting as much performance out of their engines. And speaking of those engines, we do have a question from CAB. Can the BE4 throttle low enough to hover the booster? I think so. I don't know. Alex, what do you think?
I think on the interview that Tim did to Jeff Bezos, I think he said that it could. But we'll have to see. He said something along the lines of like, it is 1/7 because it's 7 engines, right? It's 7th of the thrust, but it's also like the single engine needs to throttle down to like 40% or something like that. So it's a very deep throttle that it needs to reach to in order to be able to hover. If New Shepard is anything that to go by in terms of how Origin lends its rockets, New Shepard, not New Glenn. New Glenn will probably also do the hover on the barge. We'll see though. Maybe he also talked about trying to optimize the exoatmospheric burn, that burn that they do sort of like outside of the atmosphere to reduce the loads during reentry. It's not a reentry burn because it's not within the atmosphere, but it's outside. Whatever. This weird thing that they call it like that. And he talked about optimizing that. You should probably also optimize the landing burn. It's my opinion. I'm not a fan of hovering, especially for an uncrewed vehicle. If you don't have any people on board, why would you care, right? The only downside will be you have a little bit more risk of the booster maybe not making it. But also, on the other hand, hovering is not easy because if you hover, you are more prone and subjected to like winds and things like that, especially when you're trying to land out at sea, right? They have this system they have on the interstage with like many thrusters to be able to counteract that. Falcon doesn't need that because it doesn't hover. It does have RCS thrusters, but it doesn't have like a gazillion of them on the interstage. It has a couple of pods of RCS thrusters, and I think each one of them has 4 thrusters. That's all you need. And so it's one of those things, right? That the difference in perhaps in company culture and rocket design decisions. Then you have also Super Heavy, which could, in theory, hover, but it does not, right? Because why would you? You're losing a lot of performance by doing that. It's a waste essentially. And so when it comes down for a landing, sure, it does a little of translation and it slows down its vertical speed, but it's not hovering. It's like not staying up there in the air, sort of waiting for it to be caught. It just goes between the arms. The arms close, goes down, boom, caught. Shut down the engines, and you're done. And so it's pretty much like that, right? Also with Starship, we saw it with a buoy cam and everything. It does not hover either. It could, but it doesn't because it's a waste. Anything that you can do to be able to reduce that waste, that's more performance and more payload than you can throw.
But we're also talking about transferring that energy coming back from space, right? The Falcon 9 lands and they have to do some work on those landing legs every single time. The New Shepard, when it lands, obviously it's not as a larger vehicle, but they're not replacing the landing legs every time. They're doing the hover so they can land as softly as possible. I'm assuming New Glenn's going to do the same thing so they don't have to replace the landing legs every time. With Starship, that energy coming in from that gigantic booster being caught by the chopsticks, all of that energy is being transferred to the tower. That's why it lands, and then the rails come down. They have to transfer that energy somewhere. Falcon 9, they replaced those crush cores in the legs. There's a lot of refurbishment there. We'll have to see what New Glenn does, but the way those landing legs deploy tells me they might be hovering a little bit more than we expect, rather than replacing those landing legs after every recovery.
And it's not necessarily that they have to replace every time, but we definitely see them on certain missions use a lot more of those crush cores. Now, one of the other things, actually going back to the New Shepard launch, is Emily Calandrelli actually got a lot of awful comments for enjoying her time in space and just really being in the moment, to the extent that like the video was taken down of her flight, and apparently it wasn't taken down for that reason, but like it's not great to see when like people are getting to go to space, they're experiencing their dreams, and other people are just being downers about the whole thing, being awful to them. It's not great.
Yeah, let people have their moment. I mean, I'm not flying in space. I'm envious of Emily Calandrelli flying to space and all the other people flying to space until I get my chance. I'm saving my pennies. And someday it may happen, someday it might not, but I envy everyone who gets to make that. Alex does not. Alex is like, don't fly to space. I want to. Dee wants to. There are people out there.
We'll fly to space.
Let's go.
And Alex can be the commentator for our launch.
Interesting question came in. Lords of Random, thank you for the $5 super chat. Wants to know, if you're forced to fly to space. Okay, you're forced to fly to space. You have to choose. Are your options Dragons, Soyuz, and Orion? Which one are you choosing? They would choose Dragon. They call it a reliable craft. D, which one would you choose?
So as of right now, my choice would be Dragon. I would definitely trust it right now. If we get 1 or 2 more flights under Orion's belt, and we know, like the heat shield stuff's been worked on, I'd love to fly around the moon. I would absolutely fly in Orion once it's a little bit more figured out. If the choice is like launch tomorrow on a spacecraft, Dragon's the go-to. If I get to wait a little bit, yeah, I'll go with Orion.
All right, Alex, this is your moment. You have to fly to space. What vehicle are you flying on?
Man, I mean, if it's to low Earth orbit, I will take Dragon over Soyuz.
Yeah.
But with Orion, you're potentially going to deep space, like around the moon or something like that. That's cool. I will take Orion just because of that. Dragon will need a lot of modifications to be able to go to the moon. I mean, if they do that for free, sure, I'll take Dragon, but you know.
Well, there you go. We got him. We got him. He said they'd go if it was free. Everybody save your pennies. I'd take the Dragon. I would not fit in a Soyuz. Have you seen them? They get crammed in the Soyuz. Ugh, I just couldn't do it.
Like, if my choice is a Soyuz or not going to space, absolutely, I would take a Soyuz flight. But
I don't know.
if I get to choose whatever spacecraft, sure.
Yeah.
Dragon.
I don't know.
I love how nobody said Starliner, and then we're showing a video of Starliner.
I mean,
hey,
is it still an option, though? That's the question.
I know it can get us there.
Yeah, exactly, D. Exactly. It can get us to the ISS. Also,
I should be clear. Like, it came back down safely. It performed well on re-entry. Like, it would have performed fine had crew been in it during its return. They opted not to for an abundance of caution. So I would even fly Starliner. And I'm sure it would be fine.
Since Alex is going to be nervous, no matter what, we should just put him on Starliner.
There you go. Just, you're going to be anxious anyway, right?
One thing that I would like to address, because I've seen these comments and I actually put it in chat, about the Falcon 9 landing legs, talking about how they were the cause of one booster demise recently of B-1062. To be clear, they were not the reason for that. The last time a Falcon 9 booster was lost because of landing legs, that was in 2016. That was, I think, B-1017. It was not even a Falcon 9 V1.2. It was a V1.1 back in January 2016. There's been 2 instances where landing legs have been not the cause of the failure, but they have been a bit problematic, so to speak. Where, for example, we lost B-1058 last year, December, because the weather was very rough, and so they couldn't get Octograbber to be under the booster on time and properly secure it and everything. And most of the problem was that the legs were outdated. They didn't have this sort of self-leveling system that SpaceX had developed for them. And then B-1062, it just came at a higher velocity, folks. Like, it's you could see it on the telemetry. No legs can survive that kind of landing, landing impact. And so, like, you could even see when that booster, the remains of that booster came back, you could see pieces of the legs broken off. The nozzles were crushed as well, because it just, it pancaked essentially a little bit onto the deck. So that was not a landing leg failure. It's been very reliable. Let's put it that way.
So speaking of landing legs, Telstar 86 has a great question about the planning of these new Glenn legs when it hits the drone ships, talking about explosive welding. I haven't heard this. Alex, I'm gonna go to you first. Have you heard this?
I think I can pass this right to Alex again.
Right to Alex, because this is new
Yeah.
for me. Alex, what is this
They-
explosive thing?
Yeah, they filed a sort of like a patent as they usually do. We don't know fully if that's actually, because sometimes they file these patents and then they don't use them right on their spacecraft or rockets. We've seen, for example, them doing this sort of potential design for a reusable second stage, which looks pretty much like a copy of Stoke's second stage with a heat shield with air spike and everything, right? And maybe they have it on some hangar, I don't know, but we haven't seen anything from Blue Origin about that. So we'll see. We do have seen the landing, the thing that they use at port, and D actually captured very good footage of that recently on last month's flyover. We'll have another one soon, by the way, so keep that in mind. And one of the things that we saw is that so it went out, right? And then it came back, we did the flyover, and we saw that on the deck, there were like marks of where they had potentially done this sort of work, because it's this device that recreates the aft section of the booster, and it has the landing legs and everything. And so we think that perhaps they did some of that testing of the anchoring system, which might be that sort of explosive welding kind of thing, which I completely don't understand, to be fair. But it seems to be the sort of device that they have on the tip of the legs that essentially welds itself to the deck of the drone ship. We've also seen the sort of device that they have that might go out to the quick disconnect umbilical and try to save the booster. It's sort of like a robotic octograbber, but it's not an octograbber. It's just like, some arm that goes out there and does things on the booster to save it. So that's interesting. I guess it's another different way of handling these reusable rockets from what we've seen with SpaceX.
It's interesting. I would imagine going out there, securing the rocket, and then grinding it off the deck of the ship. Not something that you want to do when you're trying to make a reusable booster. A couple more New Glenn questions, and we're going to switch over to Starlink. D, I'm going to send this one to you since we showed the picture of the New Glenn booster and the first stage and second stage together. Are the brown areas? Damien wants to know: are the brown areas on the booster a thermal protection system? I don't think so.
I believe that is part of both, like, the structure, and it is simultaneously a thermal protection system. So rather than painting over it, they have the thermal protection system there. And actually, while it was driving by the press site, I got a photo up at the base of the engines showing all that sort of an area.
This would be hilarious on a loop if you should go up and down real fast. Play
It's
it
on a loop.
Yeah, yeah, but it's just
There you
up,
go.
down, down.
Oh, it just goes down.
Yeah.
So I've been told in the back channel that people would ask me what I would fly on.
Yes.
Yes, Kevin,
give me a
what would you fly on?
spacecraft. I'll fly on whatever spacecraft you give me.
Okay, you're gonna fly on Dragonfly. What about that?
As long as I can breathe, life support system. Give me a spacecraft that has a life support system, and I'll fly. No questions
Okay.
asked.
No questions. You're one of us. You just send me to space.
Just send me to space.
Yeah.
We're only on this Earth for so many years, and I mean, I think that's a dream for a lot of us. That's a dream to go to space. And you know what? If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But at least I went to space.
Yep. Absolutely. And I mean, I can't think of a better way to go. If Elon called me today and said, "Gene, we need you to send you to Mars," I'd be like, "Okay, hug my family, going to Mars." I mean, I wouldn't even. It doesn't even. And my wife knows. She's like, "Oh, he'd totally go to Mars. He'd be gone tomorrow." We are going to talk Starship here in a little bit. We're going to switch over to. There was one more New Glenn question we wanted to get to. How many reflights? LSR. We all know LSR. Wanted to know how many flights until the first New Glenn reuse. D, what do you think?
That's a great question. I wouldn't be at all surprised if they try to refly this very first. So you're telling me there's a chance. I wouldn't be shocked at all if they decide to like even flight 3 overall try to refly it, but at the same time, there's a chance they're gonna. Oh, are we fighting?
Why? Why are we fighting? Why should we fighting? Fighting.
Alex, what do you
I'm
think?
not saying I'm not saying I'm sure they're going to. Like they have to land it successfully, see that everything's good, make sure that their reusable thermal protection systems all in place. Like eventually they want to get this down to being able to fly a booster every like 2 weeks or so. So I'm sure they want to get going quickly with reusability, whether that means reflying the first one, or maybe they do a dissection of the first one, like booster 12, like get a really good understanding of it, and maybe they try to refly the second one. But I wouldn't be surprised if we're not far away at all from reflight.
Well, first of all, it also needs to land, right?
Exactly.
It does need to do that.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that it needs to. It's to land. Then we'll see about reuse. If it ends up being like booster 13, then But
then maybe they get a lucky first time. Do you think they're going to land on their first attempt? I think that's another important part of this question. Are they going to land for their first flight?
I have no idea. This is one of those things that it's like, sure, maybe the New Shepard program kind of helps them, but also no, because it's a different engine, different propulsion. Maybe the guidance systems kind of help, but we'll see.
Well, if they're going for the hover, that would also potentially help them at least at first. If they don't throttle up quite enough, then it's like, okay, they can still adjust from there. Whereas if they were going for a burn and perfectly timing the landing with reaching the ground without any sort of hover, like then it would be more of an iffy thing. But like the engines have flown already. We've had Vulcan flights. They've had a lot of testing. So
one of the things that they said a while ago in terms of like the reuse is that the first 2 flights were going to be new boosters. And the thinking was, okay, if they land the first one, maybe the third mission will be the reuse of the first booster, right? But if they were not, the thinking was that maybe they will have to skip one mission. So like the second booster, if they don't land the first booster, right, on the first mission, then the second mission will still have been, will be a new booster. Then they leapfrog the third mission. The third mission will still be a new booster, but the reuse will be on the fourth one. AKA, the first booster that they land, they're going to have a new booster later, and then the following one will be a reused mission. We don't know if this is still holding true. This was like months ago when they were still thinking about doing the escapade mission on the first flight, so you can imagine how long ago this was. We'll see what they do, but it kind of seems maybe not far-fetched that they might be able to do that. Yeah, we'll see.
Or it's going to land in a million pieces. I mean, it's going to land.
Oh, don't say that. I'm
just saying, look, takeoffs are optional. Landings are mandatory. That's
exactly
the first rule of aviation right there. I've said it 1,000 times. You can plan all you want. What is that? What do they say? Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. I'm not trying to land a gigantic booster on a drone ship. We could roll the tape of Falcon 9s. Look, I want them to be successful. I want them to land it. I want them to reuse it. I want them to put me on it and fly me to the moon. We'll see what happens. Let's see. Eddie says, Kevin, if you're listening, S-26. You must fly S-26 to the moon. There you go.
I'm sorry, I can't.
Also,
how are we going to do that now? We have to rebuild it.
Can't. I know. You got to rebuild it. Did you get the truck? Did you capture the truck and you got the pieces in your backyard, right, Kevin?
I want to go to space, not to jail.
Also, Mighty Don Don, thank you for gifting those 10 Red Team memberships. If you're the recipient of one of those, be sure to say thank you in the chat. We appreciate all your support in the chat with the super chats and the memberships, the gifting. This is that time of year. And if you can't see the shirts, they are awesome. This is part of the Thrust collection. I love these things. I got my wife one of the hoodies with the the mock diamonds on it. Just, I can't get enough. The stickers are coming out. Some friends of mine got their stickers already. The patches are beautiful. I've got one sitting right here from Flight 5. I mean, I just can't get enough of this stuff. Absolutely love it. I mean, you can tell I'm a fan of that stuff. Shop.nasaspaceflight.com. Okay, so we've got a lot of great questions. I know I went really fast, Kevin. I'm sorry. We zipped through that because we have a lot of great questions coming in on the chat. We are going to talk about Starship, so be sure to send in some Starship questions. There's a couple waiting. I know you've been waiting a while, but we're going to get to them in just a minute. We've got some Starlink news we're going to cover here in just a second. And by the way, Mighty Unlikely says there's already a waiting list on the one-way trip to Mars. I'm not the first one on the list. Darn. I wish I was the first one on the list. Okay, let's talk Starlink. D, there was some big regulatory news that came out for Starlink this week. We're all fans of super fast internet everywhere on Earth. And what was the big news from a regulatory perspective?
So, funnily enough, this regulatory change isn't so much about fast internet everywhere on Earth, but it's approval for their direct-to-cell constellation to work. So that's a huge deal for connectivity everywhere in the world, being able to stay connected regardless of cell towers. It's a really big deal. So, of course, there are multiple generations of the Starlink satellites. There's version 1, version 1.5, and generation 2, which is supposed to be like 30,000. So far, at this point, SpaceX is launching the V2 minis, which are launched on Falcon 9. Normally, it's about 22 through 24 to a launch. And the reason they're referred to as the minis, despite being significantly larger than the earlier satellites, which would have like 60 on a launch, is because Gen 2 was supposed to launch on Starship. And so it was the cut down, smaller version able to launch on Falcon 9 because, of course, Starship isn't really launching payloads yet, with the exception of one banana. So a while back, SpaceX announced their partnership with T-Mobile. So that partnership was to use the bands, so actually the frequencies that are allocated specifically for T-Mobile to connect cell phone towers to phones. And they formed a partnership to use those frequencies from the satellites up in space. That was a big deal even when it was announced because, okay, that means if they're using the existing frequencies, they're going to be able to connect with all the existing phones. They don't need specialized hardware. So anyone who has an iPhone 14 or 15 or 16 now, you might already have some ability to connect with satellites. So that was a partnership that happened, I believe, between Globalstar and Apple, and they have dedicated hardware in order to communicate between the phone and the satellite. And in order to make that connection, you actually sort of have to aim the phone a little bit. And at that point, it allows you to either update your location or connect with emergency services for communication. With SpaceX and T-Mobile's partnership, it's going to be more widespread than that. So they're going to have texting, eventually calls, and I know the goal is eventually for some amount of data, but they're really not going to have the capacity for all too much data. They have these massive antennas that unfurl so that the relatively weak antennas in your phone are able to be received from the satellite and vice versa. So they have this partnership with T-Mobile in the US and with carriers across the world to use the relevant frequencies in those countries. And I believe they have about a 1-year like exclusivity so that it's only for T-Mobile customers. But from that point, it's anyone will be able to use it for like emergency connection. They're not blocking people out who aren't T-Mobile customers from being able to get help, because the most amazing thing is, like, whether it's a boat, you're in the middle of nowhere, you're going to be able to have some form of communication. And while it's not going to be the speed you get from Starlink by any means, because with Starlink, they have these directional beam-formed antennas. So it basically takes all the energy, directs it through a really narrow area at the satellite to communicate back and forth between it. Your phones have omnidirectional antennas and are really weak by comparison. So you're not going to have a really good connection even with the large antennas on the satellites. But that ability to contact emergency services, especially if you're in the middle of nowhere, to send texts or updates, really can't be understated. So I feel like I just went off on a little bit of a rant there and didn't actually read what I was supposed to read. I think this is a really important thing. We're seeing more companies getting into the idea of, okay, let's do internet from satellites to phones anywhere in the world. And being able to connect to these remote areas, we've seen how much Starlink has been able to connect remote areas internet-wise, but this is just your existing phone for communication. And so rather than putting up cell towers in the middle of nowhere where they're like a hiker goes through on occasion and otherwise there's no one in that area, like that doesn't make financial sense for these companies. But with the array of Starlink satellites, they're not putting satellites over specific areas. They're in low Earth orbit. They're constantly moving around. And so in order to have dense coverage of like any one location, you basically need to have dense coverage of almost every location. Now, due to the orbits, it doesn't exactly cover the poles in the same sort of ways. But they have dedicated like polar launches. So the Earth is basically entirely covered in this connectivity. And so as SpaceX continues to branch out and work with more countries to get approval, it'll get to the point where basically anywhere on Earth, you can have this communication, not just with a Starlink device, but with a normal cell phone. So there were some requests that SpaceX was trying to get granted that weren't granted, if I recall correctly, in terms of like the power that they were using. But with the Gen 2 satellites, they're using the like KU, KA, E, and V band, and in 9 different orbital shells. So while not all of the Gen 2 satellites had the direct-to-cell capability, they can use they have the permission to launch either direct-to-cell or the standard, the standard Starlink satellites to those orbits. And the direct-to-cell satellites, like to my understanding, do both of them. And so they've got a variety of different altitudes. Of course, one of the challenges is the latency. Normally, you're really close to these cell towers, so you don't have all that much latency. So cell towers are designed to like drop packets that are from a certain latency ago, because clearly you'd be closer to another cell tower if you're connecting to a cell tower that's 100 miles away from you. In this case, if you don't have any other cell towers you're reaching on Earth, no, the one that's several hundred kilometers up above you is the one that you should be connecting to. So, yeah, like I said at the beginning, SpaceX got their approval to like operate it. So I'm assuming this is going to start more internally. We've already seen like a FaceTime call a while back, I believe, happened over direct to cell from a Starlink satellite. And that was only operating one cell phone in this entire cell. And as more and more cell phones are going to connect to the satellites, it will dilute the total bandwidth. So there's not going to be enough for everyone to be FaceTiming on these satellites, but that's also not necessary. And it's a really exciting thing to have to just further connect the world.
Guys, I have a question.
Go ahead, Kevin.
I have a question. So I want to make some conversation here, right? I got a Google Pixel Fold 9, right? And on the Google Pixel Fold 9, when I signed up for the service and everything, it actually said that you can get emergency service via satellite. How is direct to cell with SpaceX any different than this emergency SOS feature that Google currently has already on their Android phones?
So I'll have to read a little bit more about that one specifically. For the most part, that stuff is being done with dedicated hardware to like Globalstar satellites. And so for emergency SOS, like that'll just be emergency situations you can connect with it. Whereas with SpaceX's direct to cell situation, that should be texting, phone calls. It should be available even in non-emergency situations. So absolutely, the satellite SOS features, whether it's with your Fold, whether it's with iPhones, those are life-saving features already, and it's great to see that. And so this is just a step beyond it being emergency only.
Every time my phone goes to SOS mode, it freaks me out. I'm like, no, because I know it's like you can only direct to the satellite. Speaking of satellites, do you think we're actually going to get to 30,000 ish satellites? D?
Yeah.
Hang on, I'm going to ask D this question first, Alex. I'm coming to you. I'm coming to you next.
I was going to say
that's a lot of satellites.
I'll just say yes, but I'm sure Alex has the numbers of how they've launched, how fast they are starting to deorbit, and all that sort of stuff. Once Starship gets online, if they're launching larger satellites and they're not able to fit a ton more, maybe it'll be difficult for them to get there, but they've launched so many thousands of satellites already, and Alex, I'm sure, has those numbers.
Yeah, so one of the things that also, when SpaceX got approval to deploy to the second generation of Starlink, because they had the first one, and now they have the second one where they launched these V2 mini satellites into, they proposed, to be exact, 29,988 satellites to be launched into that. But the commission, the Federal Communications Commission, they said, okay, we'll approve you for 7,500 satellites for now. We'll talk about the other ones when we get there, right? Because there's all of these concerns about orbital debris and traffic management. So they said, look, you're good at least with the first 7,500 of them. That's gonna get you for a little bit here in launches and whatnot. We'll talk about that. It's not that they don't approve. It's just that they defer that decision, as they call it, right? They leave it for a later time. So far, SpaceX has launched 3,420 of these satellites into Generation 2 of the Starlink constellation. So, of the nearly 7,000, about half of them are on this second constellation. So they have not reached yet 7,500 satellites. They are not even, halfway there, I guess. So there's still a ways to go. Obviously, once the Starship comes online, they are able to launch, I believe, with Block 2, they can launch maybe 54 of them. Block 3, we'll see how much, how many satellites they can launch, probably, nearly 100 or something, is that payload bay will be ginormous. But this is one of the things, right, that right now they only are approved to launch 7,500 of these satellites, and then we'll see. So the we'll see, that's the thing that we'll probably have to see, no pun intended, in a couple of years from now, once they get around to, okay, you're already reaching your limit, you're very, very close to that limit. Let's see what we can do here to, maybe they do another 7,500, and they keep going like that until they reach the 29,988 satellites. I have here the notes for that, and so, we'll see. I think one of the other big deals of this is part of this change not only approved direct to cell, but also lower altitude orbits. So up until now, they were approved to launch in between 530 and 550 kilometers, right? So above the ISS. But this time they were proposing between 340, I think, and 360. I have it somewhere. But anyways, so it's much lower, which means you have lower latency, potential as well for a higher bandwidth because of a bunch of physics things. And so this is one of those things that it's really a big deal because it approves that for direct to cell, but also the regular V2 mini satellites. So also for those that have, the regular Starlink antennas, they could have lower latency and higher bandwidth. with that. And so this is quite a big deal in that sense. And
yeah, and we can't
really
talk about the number. We can't talk about the number of satellites in orbit, because when you look at the debris track, the orbital tracker, it just sees this little globe and these things flying everywhere. And one of the things we talk about is the Kessler syndrome, the Kessler effect, where that orbital debris starts, it's a chain reaction. Mighty unlikely, as actually that question isn't the real nerd question about the number of satellites, truly avoiding the Kessler effect, where satellites start slamming into each other. And one thing we have to remember about this is actually two things. Number one, I'll start this question, then I'm going to come to you, D. I'll start this answer, is space is really big. Like we kind of have trouble grasping the size of it. One of the things we used to say in aviation is when we were flying into an airport, the sky is really big, the plane's really small, right? So that's why you don't have planes slamming into each other. Also, there's air traffic control, but it's really a big space we're dealing with, very, very big. So even though we see the tracker on our screens with a little tiny Earth and a billion things going around it, there's a lot of space between those billions of things going around it. And the second thing we need to look at when we talk about the Kessler effect and the number of satellites we put in orbit is, as the technology improves, we're going to need fewer satellites to do the same things we do now with a larger number of satellites, right? We're launching bigger payloads. We're launching more powerful technology. We're launching bigger antennas into space. So those satellites, as we go into the future, can do more than we can now. D, I'm going to throw that one to you. About the Kessler effect.
Yeah, they have. They also have a lot of safeties built into the satellites. For one, they have these active avoidance maneuvers. They have their orbital tracks all kept track of, so they will automatically avoid other satellites. And if another satellite is near a Starlink, they can either steer it manually but they can work with the other companies to make sure that they keep a safe distance. Now, that's not to say that there aren't near misses. There are always going to be more near misses if you have more satellites in space. So one of the other upsides for being at a really low orbit is if any one of these satellites dies, it will decay back to Earth pretty quickly. They still have some atmosphere up there. It's not like they're super far above the ISS. They have the thrusters to maintain their altitude and everything. And if they don't, they will quickly decay. They are also deployed at a really low altitude. So if within a couple days the satellites can't fire their thrusters, they're going to be re-entering. We actually saw that, I believe, with a solar storm that happened right around the time of a Starlink launch. And then all of a sudden, like, all of these satellites were re-entering, like there was too much drag because they are so close to the denser part of the atmosphere. That's not quite the right wording, but they have a lot of safeties built into their deployment area in addition to the active avoidance. And it's certainly something that will need to continue to be talked about when there are 30,000 Starlink satellites. That will create more interference with on-the-ground astronomy, looking up at the stars. And there are more discussions to be had there with making sure it doesn't impact science. SpaceX has done a lot with it. Was a darkened coating, then it's controlling the attitude with reflective surfaces to reflect the light away from the Earth. They're regularly working with organizations to try to minimize the impact as much as possible. And it's really important that they continue to do that because they already are having an impact and they will continue to have an impact.
And Alex, you said you wanted to talk about some restrictions for these satellites.
Yeah, I requested. There we go. Page 47, by the way, Kevin. That's the one that you should be looking out for. But one of the things that it's worth mentioning is that the document goes in depth. Like the part about we authorize things is like this little short, couple of pages thing, and then the rest of the document, it's like we're addressing the comments of a bunch of different organizations like EchoStar, Dish, Kuiper, and everything. And then at the very end, there's like a summary of all the things that SpaceX needs to. And the 89, hang on. Go back a little bit, where it says 89, it is further ordered. And then it says that this authorization is subject to the following requirements and conditions. And now you can keep scrolling for like 5 minutes, and that list keeps going on. They need, so it's ordering like A, B, C. They need up to 4 letters, if I remember correctly, because they keep repeating. Yeah, like I, L, M, N, N. Like, look at that. Those conditions, that's all of those things, in order to be able for SpaceX to, sort of, not have like things like concerns about interference with other systems, with astronomy, with NASA, for example, the YYY. SpaceX must communicate and collaborate with NASA to ensure that deployment and operation of its satellites does not unduly constrain deployment and operation of NASA assets and missions, etc., etc. Like, there's so many of these requirements where all of this that we just talked about the Kessler syndrome, the having to navigate through space and having to coordinate with Starlink, right? All of that is baked into this approval. If they do not go through that, if they do not obey all of these requirements, then of course SpaceX will just, the FCC will probably fine SpaceX or things like that. And things like, for example, with the National Science Foundation, the other NSF, if you will. So these things, they need to coordinate in terms of how they're going to be doing, how their satellites are going to come over astronomy. Even with international bodies as well, their satellites need, for example, for direct-to-cell connectivity or internet, or just regular internet connectivity, the FCC sort of forces them to have a software on the satellites to be able to determine whether they're transmitting outside of the border or inside of the border, because they're transmitting outside of the US. It's a big deal, right? And so they need to carefully code that software onto the satellites so that they are doing all of these transmissions correctly. One of the things that it sort of limits as well, which is way earlier in the document, but I'm not going to make Kevin go back there. One of the things is that we have the sort of, they allow satellites in lower altitudes. However, there's a catch there, and I'm not talking about super heavy for once. And that is, while the FCC approves them to have up to 7,500 satellites in those lower orbits because it is underneath of the ISS orbit, they sort of the requirement, side requirement kind of thing, is that they need to coordinate with NASA to be able to know how many of these satellites they are allowed to be there. So the FCC, it's like, okay, you have this agreement with NASA. You need to coordinate with NASA because there's a bunch of things that go to the ISS, right? And so they need to go through all of these altitudes. And one of the things that the FCC asked them is that we approve you go to 7,500 satellites, but there's there's an even more limiting factor here, which is what you coordinate with NASA. And so far, NASA and SpaceX have coordinated for 400 satellites in these lower altitudes. But the FCC also says, look, we're not going to be approving now 400, and then later on you do another coordination with NASA, and now it's 600, right? We're not going to keep doing this because it's very burdensome for regulatory bodies to be doing this every single time. You do you with NASA. You coordinate with that. Just tell us when you have a new number, when you have a new update on this. Tell us 30 days ahead of time before keep launching these satellites into those lower orbits. We're cool with that. You're approved up until 7,500 with this sort of limiting requirement, which is it is you only can until you reach the limit with NASA. If in the future that limit is raised, we're cool with that. Up until the 7,500, you're cool, right? That's sort of the requirement there, that sort of thing. And they explain the rationale for why, yeah, they approved to 7,500, but you have the requirement for NASA. It's like, you just don't want to keep doing this every single time you do another partnership, right? And reorganize your things with NASA. It's like, we're not even involved there. So it's sort of this thing that they go into in the document.
You know, I think I don't know what the heck Alex just said, but I think the breaking news from this is that SpaceX has to coordinate with NSF.
Yeah.
Hey, they should coordinate with us tonight, because I think there's a stream in a couple hours.
There's one
for another Starlink launch.
There is.
So they should definitely coordinate with NSF.
Yeah. Thank you guys for going to shop.nasaspaceflight.com, picking up those amazing prints, some of them from D, some of them from Max, and some of the other great photographers and the folks in the field. And also a great question that comes in talking about, we're going to switch, we've been talking about satellites, and I think D brought up that, they're going to start launching these V2 Starlink satellites on Starship, and that's going to kind of carry us through the rest of the Flame Trench tonight. And we talk about our road to version 2 Starship and a couple of the other things with related to that. But Captain Q had a prediction. Thank you so much for the super chat, Captain Q. 2025 launches. All right, here we go. I don't know if this adds up, but we're going to see. 1 SLS launch, 2 to 3 New Glenn. I'm not going to say that word. New Glenn launches. And
I'll be sure to let Jack know that you said 2 to 3 Glenny.
And then 10 Starship launches. I hope the Starship launches, I hope that number's a little low. What do you think? Very quick, D.
I would say SLS seems about right. Glenny, I'll hope for more, but I think 2 to 3 is a reasonable estimate. And I would guess maybe 2 more Starship launches, so maybe 12 Starship launches. I think that's a little bit optimistic, but I want to see that.
What about Vulcan?
Alex? There's some other ones in there too, Kevin. We're going to talk about them. This was Captain Q's question.
6. Let's throw 7.
Is this?
That's a bit optimistic. Let's go.
Wait.
I'll go 5.
Shouldn't
5
we
Vulcan.
do this like at the end of December? We do this every single time.
Yeah, we're going to do it. We're going to do it again. We'll throw all of them in there at the end of the year. We'll do it again.
I was like, wait, spoilers. Spoilers.
Yeah. No, I too. I think there's going to be more than 10. Alex, what do you think?
I think for Starship, we're going to get more than 10. 10 minimum, I think. I really will hope to get more than 12. But 10 to 12, I think it's probably a good estimate for Starship. New Glenn, 4 to 5, I think. They have
very optimistic.
Well, I don't think it's fully up. I mean,
they got to build them. So far, they have what, 1.5?
They have 1, 2 actually, because the one that they use for pathfinding, the tank for that is the one that they're going to be using for our later booster. So,
I didn't think that was flight hardware.
It is flight hardware.
Okay.
What it was not flight hardware was the engine section and the forward module, okay, the interstage. But tank section is flight hardware, and so this first booster is already manufactured. They are already producing multiple second stages and boosters on the factory as well. When that team factory tour in June, I think it was when that happened, because that's when he went there. That was, they had already the second stage built for the second flight of New Glenn. So there's a good chance that they can get at least 2-3 boosters completed by the end of 2025. And if they use one or 2 of these, maybe they could get 4 or 5 launches. I think it's not far-fetched, and they also have, much like SpaceX with Starship, they have their own demand with Starlink. Blue Origin has Kuiper, right? It's not the same company, but it's it's like a sister company kind of thing. It's sort of like Tesla, right? With SpaceX. And SLS, I don't think it's gonna launch next year. I wish it
Really?
I wish it was possible, but I don't think. I think it's gonna go to 2026.
Yeah. Well, there you go. And let's talk about Starship. We talked New Glenn potentially launching early next year. We also have some information, according to some paperwork from NASA. The 7th flight of Starship is, drum roll please, which we don't have in sound effects, right?
Train horn.
It's a train.
Horn. No earlier than
Hype
January 11th is what the paperwork is saying. This comes from some side documentation that NASA filed to assist the observation. They're talking about their their plane asking to fly without lights over the recovery area. And you saw the tweets from Elon saying that they're gonna put this one back down in the Indian Ocean, and then they're gonna start looking to catch starships. We'll see what happens with that. So we're looking at ship 33, booster 14, and we are talking about the Block 2 starships flying on the Block 1 boosters. So let's talk a little bit about the road to a fully version 2 booster and ship and infrastructure. And I'm going to go to Alex for this one first, because I know you're following Starship a lot closer than probably anybody else on Earth. So when you start to think about infrastructure and the road to a fully version 2 Starship, well, hang on. Let's take a step back. Okay. I see what's on the screen. I'm going to let you break this down. Then we'll talk about infrastructure. Alex, take it away.
Okay, so we had this sort of document. Worth noting though, so it talks about January 11th and whatever. Worth pointing out that this was a few days before Flight 6, right? So this might have slipped to the right. That's what usually these things do, right? We have seen at least, right, that based on what Elon said after Flight 6 that they want to still do a Notion landing. This seems to say that at least a few days before Flight 6, they wanted to do that landing in the Indian Ocean, just like the last few times. It also says approximately 1 hour after launch, aka very similar profile to the ones that we've seen since Flight 3, where they've been landing in the Indian Ocean. Now, does that mean it is still the plan? We have no idea. Chances are that it is still, like, Elon said, we're still going to be landing the ship in the ocean, right? How is it going to get there to that ocean? We have no idea, right? Or even what ocean? Maybe it's no longer the Indian Ocean. Maybe now it's the Pacific Ocean, right? One thing that I will address, though, the current environmental assessment does not consider landings of the ship in the Gulf of Mexico. So if your theory is, they're going to land in the Gulf of Mexico, that's a great theory. I will say that's probably a, reasonable guess. One of the problems, though, they will need an environmental assessment for that because they don't have it right now. Even the new one that they're sort of asking for increased cadence and whatnot, it still does not contemplate Gulf landings for the ship. That's not to say maybe in the case of an abort during a catch or whatever, they might dump it in the Gulf of Mexico, but that's an abort case. That's not an actual. We're targeting the Gulf of Mexico. That's not the case, right? So my guess is it's still probably an ocean landing. Good chances are that it's going to be again the Indian Ocean. Maybe it could be the Pacific Ocean. We don't know. There are a few areas in the Pacific Ocean where they can land the ship, and they are approved and everything. So we'll see. Obviously, they need a license modification because it's a new version of the vehicle, right? Especially the ship, as you were mentioning, the ship is version 2 or Block 2, and the booster is version 1 or Block 1. I will also like to address the NASASpaceflight app. I've changed that recently because it was a bit outdated. The nomenclature of certain types of starships and whatnot, that was a carryover when Michael was handling all of that back in the day. And it needed a refresh. And so, not that section. Kevin, if you go to rockets and look out Starship, as I'm seeing him preparing that website, we've updated the Starship section. When you look up the rockets and you see like Alpha rocket, all of these, like Angara and all of that. And then you go and you can see the different configurations. And so you can see, if you scroll down a little bit, you can see the different configurations. Future configurations, I've not dealt with those. So Cargo Starship is still the same, and it shows a picture of a Block 0, Block 1, I guess. Crew Starship is also like future stuff. I have not touched those. And Starship HLS, same. But the things that are more dear and near to us, Block 1, I've updated those with the liftoff thrust, the stages, the rocket height. I've considered sort of Block 1, the ones from like Flight 2 onwards. Flight 1, I have it under original, so to speak, because I was like the original kind of Starship. And then the Block 1, 2, this was actually not me. This was another manager of the app that thought, hey, let's put like a Frankenstein kind of render for using the SpaceX renders and put a Block 2 ship on a Block 1 booster. And we updated that and we call it like Block 1/2. That's the one that we're gonna see. So that's currently active. And then the Block 2, which will be also the booster, is Block 2 as well. So it has the render of the full thing. And then the original, as I was saying, the one from Flight 1, rest in peace, Booster 7 and Ship 24.
I'm not going to call it Block 1/2. I just can't bring myself to do that. Block 1, 2.
It's not Block 1/2. It's more like
I know
1/2, right? Because you have one stage is Block 1 and the other stage is Block 2, right? We'll probably have something similar as well, where we're gonna have maybe Block 2 ships on Block 3 boosters and Block 3 ships. Like maybe we have Block 2 and Block 3 ships running alongside every single time, which will be hilarious. But hey, whatever.
You talked about an abort into the Gulf of Mexico, and One Man 2001 has a question regarding that for Flight 6. When we saw the booster come in, and obviously there was communication issue with the tower, and they diverted to Mexico. Do we have confirmation that Booster 13 was actually sunk? Do we know that? That's the question.
We don't know fully, right? There's some speculation there that it was seen perhaps in the footage from Tim. I'm not fully sure if that was actually that or just simply a booster going pop, and then you see this reflection. It's like, you see reflections on a thing that's made out of metal, right? Like, if you don't see reflections, that will be a very bad thing for the metal itself, I guess. But like, look, it's part of the PA. It's part of the programmatic environmental assessment, where it says that if things float, SpaceX either has to sink it, right, or recover them. There's also other imagery as well out there from Ship 31 parts that have been recovered in Australia and whatnot. And that is totally sensible. Like, it makes sense to me that they do that, because that's part of the programmatic environmental assessment. Like, they have to do that. Anything that floats, they have to recover that. And so things like COPVs, heat shield tiles, stuff like that is recovered and then, sent safe. Because that could be a hazard for navigation, and especially in the Gulf of Mexico, where you have fishing and whatnot. They recovered the hot staging ring, for example, in a place where the depth of the hot staging ring from Booster 12, the depth of the water there, it's I think like 15 meters. In the case of Booster 13, there were these, you all probably saw it, these leaked pictures and videos of Booster 13 bubbling on the water, and there was this video of the booster sort of like, trying to sink, but then it hit the bottom, because it was like a 30-meter tall piece of the booster, and the water is like maybe 25 meters deep, right? So it's like, that tends to happen. So these things are could potentially endanger navigation and fishing and whatnot, and so you don't want that. Even without approval, environmental approval and whatnot, it makes sense to be able to say, let's remove this. This is a hazard. Let's not get this out there, right?
Yeah. I get my information from NSF and SpaceX. That's where Gene goes. So, Dee, I have a question for you. Actually, Blaze Plaz has a question for you, and it has to do with lighting. You're going to love this question.
Ooh, okay.
Do you think SpaceX will return to launching Starships in the morning for all the remaining test flights? And I want to know, how's that going to affect your photography?
I hope not. The morning light, like, it's a really cool light. You get some cool colors. I want to see like a jellyfish. So if they launch a little bit before sunrise, that would be awesome. But the bright light that we got in the afternoon was wonderful. It changes a lot. So depending on when the window is, like if it's a sunrise window, there's a chance I set some of my cameras with automatic exposure, because if it launches at properly night, the exposure is going to be different than if it launches right at sunrise or a bit after. When it launches more in the afternoon or midday, that's a lot easier to plan around and make sure, like, yep, this is the exact exposure I want. I can go with this. I want to see a night launch of Starship. I want to see more beautiful daytime launches of Starship. And I want to see pre-sunrise launches of Starship. I want all the different opportunities. I know, like, every once in a while it gets a little bit old of like so many Falcon 9 Starlink night launches at 3 a.m. But every launch is unique. We recently had a Starlink launch, and the clarity in the atmosphere was perfect. And we were able to see the second stage all the way down to the horizon. And so I was following it, and I heard that that the landing burn started, and I was like, wow, I don't normally still see the second stage at this point in flight. And I followed it all the way until the trees. And so every time of day has its unique opportunities. And personally, I want a couple more daytime launches. I want to get catch in the daytime with the gorgeous angle that we get at River or at the outpost. But yeah, there's so many different times that we just need more Starship launches. What can I say?
Well, that kind of leads me into the next question from Mr. Python, who is asking, do we think Boca Chica is going to stop being an R&D facility at some point? And I'll answer this one first, then I'm going to go to Alex. There's a lot of work to be done before we have an operational vehicle. And it's going to be hundreds and hundreds, in my opinion, hundreds of launches before it's certified to put people on it. So I think R&D, and when you talk about SpaceX and their research and development, they're building a factory, they're building a machine to build the machine is what they're doing. And I don't think Boca Chica is going to go away anytime soon. Alex, what do you think?
Real quick.
Yeah, D, go.
I'm going to hop in. I saw a question in chat asking me to explain what a jellyfish is.
Oh,
and
yes.
I don't want to leave anyone out here.
Yeah.
So a jellyfish is a name, but that space fans have sort of granted for this cool effect when a rocket launches and the sun is either set or hasn't yet risen. So the gases from the rocket, because it's so much higher in the atmosphere, it'll get illuminated by the sun. And it expands out, and it creates this gorgeous effect because it's dark all around you, but those gases are just bright in the sky. And so it's a really cool view to see, a little bit of a unique thing. I'd say like an hour to 30 minutes before sunrise might provide the best jellyfish. But even if you get a launch like an hour or two before the sun rises and then the sun starts to rise, you can sometimes see the after effect of the exhaust from a rocket that have been illuminated. And it can tend to last up there a while as the sun continues to rise. So it's just a name for that cool effect when a rocket launches at the perfect time. The gases are lit by the sun and the ground is not yet.
And when the plume from, like when it's an RTLS, especially when the booster does its flip and the exhaust from the second stage interacts with the exhaust from the first stage, you get these amazing patterns and colors, and it's a sight to see. Watch Starlink launches. They're amazing.
So that's a bit different. The Starlink launches don't have the boost back burn. When you have the boost back burn at night, then you get the hot gases interacting just between the stages, regardless of whether it's at the time of day for a jellyfish.
One of the cool things of Starship that we'll see is that we're going to have double jellyfish, because we're going to have the interaction from the hot staging, right? We already see some kind of jellyfish kind of thing, right? It's not entirely, but it kind of reminds you of that interaction. And then when the booster flips and starts the boost back burn or whatever, then you have the interaction between the two. So we'll have double Starship Nebula, I guess. That's what we call it, with Falcon, the Falcon Nebula, because it kind of looks like this sort of, planetary nebula and things like that. But yeah, it looks really cool. I really hope we can see that one day.
I should have said Falcon 9 launches, not Starlink launches. You're right, D, obviously. Let me thank some folks real quick. We want to thank John James for gifting Red Team membership. Thank you so much for that. Also, a store message. I'm going to say Mike. It's MIC. Could be Mick. Mike. I don't know. Thanks, NSF. You guys are awesome. Next year, we'll be wearing these shirts to a booster catch. Absolutely agree. Wear the shirts to the booster catch. And thank you so much for supporting us. That one, the Sonic Vibe shirt, is awesome. Great design. Also, Phil, thank you so much for that Red Team membership that you gifted. And if you are a recipient of that, be sure to say thank you in chat. Lots and lots of questions. And we want to get to them all about Starship. So let's go through them. Let's see. Depend on Starship. I don't know about that one. Gideon wants to know, how much can we depend on a Starship launching on January 11th? There's a lot of stuff that happens between now and then. Yeah. There's a lot that needs to happen there. I'm Gene. I'm the optimist. I want it to happen when they say it's going to happen. We'll see. If it was easy, everybody would do it. SNF 1965 wants to know, I noticed 2 Block 2 ships. Now, this was a render, or was it the photograph of the Tom and Jerry? It looked like render to me.
Yeah, it was fan made. It's not official. We have no idea that those 2 vehicles are going to be at all on the refueling trip. But it
would be awesome if they did it. You have the Target and the Chaser. That would be great.
It would be funny. Yeah, we'll see. It could also be the Roadrunner and Coyote.
It could. It could
also be that, like that, right?
Yep.
But yeah.
Yeah, it would be funny if they did that. The Tom and Jerry, and also the Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner would be good. But, SpaceX has a history of that. They've done the Banana. They've done the Mechazilla. Who knows what they're going to keep? They're going to keep doing that. Let's see. Archie Rush says, what Starship do you think SpaceX will use as the workhorse? And this is really going to lead me into my discussion about commodities and trucking these propellants in. There's going to be a lot of expansion, a lot of changes at Starbase, but also around the world as we get more and more places we can launch and recover Starship. So the workhorse, Block 2 or Block 3? Archie says it's probably going to be Block 2. Alex, what do you think? And then I'm going to come to you, D.
It kind of looks like, at least the booster, there's probably no objections, Ash, I assume, in chat, right? That it's probably going to just evolve into Block 3, and that's where it's going to stick. But it feels like maybe the ships, there's going to be, Block 2, Block 3, right? I do not know about tankers and whatnot. I believe Elon said recently that for the tankers, they're just going to be filling up the payload bay with more tank. Like, they'll just expand the tankage section into the payload bay. So you could, in theory, just like they did between Block 1 and Block 2, where Block 2 has a shorter payload bay section, but the tanks are larger, right? You could, in theory, do something like that with Block 3, where you go to Block 3, and Block 3 will have both an extension of the tanks and the payload bay. But instead, you're like, okay, the ship will be as tall as any other Block 3 ship, right? But it's a tanker, so we're going to fill up the entire thing. Like, the tanks are going to be larger. So we're going to have all of the, like, the common bulkhead is going to go up, and the forward bulkhead is also going to go up. Mm-hmm. And so you're going to have this big tank section, and then just a tiny, little nose gun on the top. And so that could be a thing, but I really don't know. I do think we're going to have this sort of running simultaneously, because sometimes for a certain mission, maybe you're okay with Block 2 ships, right? For other missions, maybe you kind of need the Block 3, as this person was talking about, maybe for tankers, right? Who knows?
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective about Block 2, Block 3 for specific missions. D, you spent a lot of time at Starbase, and you've seen truck after truck after truck after truck of methane and liquid oxygen coming in. What do you think they're going to do? This is just a random question. What do you think they're going to do for future commodity storage and requirements? Because sending hundreds of trucks down that road is just going to, it just can't work for Block 2 and Block 3 ships.
No, I mean, they have one road out there right now, and even as I was there was work being done on the road, and the road badly needed it. Cars are constantly losing tires, and there are so many trucks going on this road that it's just continuing to damage the road. Eventually, they're going to have to figure out some sort of their own production on site, and whether that's nearby, whether they run a pipe to somewhere that they have a production facility, whether they have a production facility near the launch site, remains to be seen. But these launches use up so much of quite literally the nation's supply of liquid oxygen, which is necessary for things like hospitals and Falcon 9 launches and every other rocket. Like, liquid oxygen is needed a lot of these places. Starship uses up so much of the supply with the launch. So they're going to have to figure something out, like you said, especially when they're getting to the point of rapid reusability. If they are trying to refill the tanks and if they're launching every day, they're not really going to have all that much time to fill the tanks. For reference, with Flight 6, it was about an 8 a.m. road closure for a 4 p.m. launch. The road reopened, I think, a couple hours after launch. So it ended up being like 10 or 12 hours. So if they're closing that road half the time, that's going to create complications because they're not going to be able to truck in enough of their propellant in that period of time. They have a whole bunch of bays where so many trucks can park side by side and all offload at the same time. But even as I was there was a line of these trucks going down Highway 4. And then it was the fun, all right, all these trucks are parked on the road. So everyone's sort of going into the opposite lane to get down onto the beach. And it's definitely something they're going to have to work on figuring out.
Yeah. Alex, what do you think? Do you think they're going to pipe it in? How do they do this? Do they make it on site? What do they do?
Yeah, a lot of people say, oh, they need to build another road. They need to build a pipeline. It's like, sure, that takes deal probably of the transportation issue, right? Of getting it to the pad. It's like, you need to deal way earlier with this issue, which is how do you source that propellant? Not just propellant like liquid oxygen and liquid methane, right? But they also use a lot of liquid nitrogen for the tank farming. So for now, they have a plan to put an air separation unit. They had those plans a long time ago. They scrapped those because it was like the air separation unit was at Sanchez. They wanted to have like this pipeline going out to the launch site and whatnot. Now they want to put the air separation unit on the pad itself. And so that should alleviate some of these concerns. But the air separation unit can only provide oxygen and nitrogen. And, well, maybe it could, deliver a little bit of argon if they want to weld starships or whatever. All right. Or use it on Starlink because it's also the fuel for that. But, like, you could, in theory, because this is another whole different thing as well that SpaceX, Elon more specifically, has talked about in the past of, we'll just create methane out of the air and whatever, right? Just like they're going to be doing it on Mars. And it's like, sure, but how, right? Because if you do it on Mars, you have 2.5 years until the planet's lying again. You have plenty of time to be able to fill up the, over 1,000 tons of propellant. And not all of that is methane. Only 300 tons, I think, is methane. So you have 2.5 years to create all of that, which means you don't need a lot of power. You don't need a lot of systems. You just need to be able to run it, keep it going for those 2.5 years, and you're good to go. If you're launching every 2.5 hours instead, right? You need a lot of power to be able to create methane out of thin air, literally, right? Like you will need to take the CO2 out of the air. You need to take water. You need to decompose the water. Like, that takes a lot of energy, and it is one of these big problems that if you want to put a lot of energy into something, you need an energy source, and solar panels just doesn't cut it. I once did sort of like a back of the napkin kind of calculation. You need a small nuclear power plant to be able to operate this kind of, requirements of launching every couple of hours or so from a facility like this. It's really complicated unless you pipe it. Like that's where the pipe is a nice solution. It's not entirely. You essentially just use the natural resources that you might have nearby. I believe there's a nearby LNG pipe plant and things like that, and so they could in theory just transfer that, but still you're talking about a lot of liquid natural gas every single day, right? So we'll see. Yeah, I'm done. You can remove that.
You got 26 more seconds. Keep going. So we talked about the commodity storage, and obviously we know with the larger ships and the faster cadence. Let's shift to the build site. We all remember the windbreak, right? We remember the tents. The first time I went to Boca Chica, I was like, I come out of the little trees there and you come into the flats and I saw the windbreak and I got really excited. And now when you get out there and you see the mega bays dwarfing the poor little high bay, we've gotten reports from Elon, SpaceX is talking about this thing called Gigabay. And I had a conversation today about where this thing could go. And I don't like some of the scenarios where this enormous Gigabay could go. We know it's going to take the place of the high bay. We don't know if it's going to consume the gateway building. We don't know where it's going to go and how they're going to orient it. I'll just go around the room here. D, we obviously know the high bay is gone. What do you think they're going to do with this Gigabay if they build it?
Oh, I think there's no shot that it's not getting built, honestly.
They're posting job positions for people to build it, so...
No, they updated those positions. They definitely weren't for the Gigabay. They made sure to change that after they posted them, right?
Starship production is now.
Yeah. Starship production.
But, yeah, I mean, the high bay will go away. My guess would be that the mega bays are going to stay there. If they work, if they don't need the room, why get rid of them if they can just add a huge amount of capacity to the number of ships and the number of boosters that they can have in production at any given time. Yeah.
The conversation I had today was they'll build the the Gigabay. I don't know, it's super mega bay. What are we going to call it? They'll build it tall enough for the Block 2, potentially Block 3 boosters to come in and out. They'll save the mega bays because they can get the ships in and out. And again, like we said, you need way more ships than you do boosters. Right? Alex, what's your thought?
I think it's not just going to be about the height, but also the size and scope of this building. One of the things that we've seen, at least with Falcon, is consolidation. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you've seen our Cape flyovers for the last maybe 2.5-3 years, SpaceX has been moving their operations. They had them sort of like spread out over the Cape side of things, but now they have these little, it's actually big. A rather big facility, this Roberts Road complex at the Kennedy Space Center. So you have the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station and the Kennedy Space Center in Merritt Island, right? So you have this sort of split. So they have now at the Kennedy Space Center at Roberts Road complex a lot of these things that were in the past spread out over the Cape. Now they are consolidated into maybe not one single building, but at least one single, rough location, right? So you have Hangar X, where they do refurbishment of boosters and fairing halves and things like that. And they also have even a launch control center as well, very famously recently, because they were fined for that, but, that was a past flame trench. Go back to that. But, they also have the Hangar X2 building, which started first as a sort of like a Florida star factory kind of thing, but they have repurposed that to be able to integrate Starlink satellites into fairing and everything for Falcon. So they are able to just do Starlinks there, and that's very neat because then they can use their own payload processing facility at the Cape just for customer missions, which they have a lot of them lately, by the way. And so that allows them to be able to streamline operations, to consolidate everything. the worker that needs to work, for example, on Starlink, and they can just go over to hangar, from hangar X2, they go to hangar X, like, hey, how are you going with the booster and the second stage? Because they also integrate second stages with the booster. That is a very consolidated thing, right? And that's probably why Falcons have been able to pick up the cadence in the last few years. I believe that was a very helpful thing. One of the things that I think is going to happen with Starbase is probably something similar, where right now the Star Factory is only connected to one of the bays, Mega Bay 2, and it's a kind of a false connection because we have not seen yet any major hardware going between the Star Factory and the Mega Bay 2. It's actually being outside of the buildings through the ring yard. I can see a future where SpaceX just makes like a big bay in the middle, right? And then they have like the Star Factory around it, and even maybe the garage building, right? The multi-story building with parking space and everything. You just drive in, park your car, go to build rockets to go to Mars. Like, that's how cool is that, right? And how streamlined. And they're going to have also an office building attached to it. So you have management next to the factories and next to the launch control center. Like, you're going to have everything consolidated. Same concept that they have applied to Falcon of, hey, let's put everything in the same place, right? I can think of a future where this Gigabay is just the bay at Starbase. It's the thing that is being, churning out all of these vehicles.
Yeah. When you look at it from above, you look at the roads leading to Massey's, and I mean, not Massey's, but the Sanchez lot, the Rocket Garden. They're going to be, if they build these gigantic mega bays, gigabays, whatever, they're blocking some of those roads. They can't get around it because the structures get so large. And because the structures get so large, we've seen some weather flow through that is not conducive to building rockets, hence the giant roll-up doors they have now. And, some of the other things they put into place to help the welders, et cetera, et cetera. But has Boca Chica, and this is from Home Planet, has Starbase faced a major hurricane direct hit yet? I don't recall. They got close. They got glanced, right?
They got hit earlier this year. I don't believe it ended up being a direct hit. I believe it more impacted Houston. But even still, it has had lasting impacts on the area there. The beach is very different now. The water, it's reaching the dunes during a significant period of the time. It makes it more difficult to go out there and get to some of our locations. For a long time, the road was exposed on the beach, which it's just torn up pieces of asphalt there. So normally it's like sand over that, and recently I believe they recovered it with sand, but it did have an impact. We also saw like the crabs getting disturbed. Like there was a lot of different stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, one of the things that I've noticed as well is you guys when you go out there, of course you're not 24/7. You only go for the few times that they launch and whatever. But I do see, for example, when Jack, Cesar, and all of these folks are a little bit more permanent. Let's put it that way, because of whole the scheduling, right? And they talk about in the back channel saying, "Oh, let's coordinate. We need to go to this place. We need to," because there are cameras that need to be dealt with. There's things, and every single time, especially the ones that are in the beach, every single time there's like, even on low tide, sometimes they're like, guys, we cannot go out there. It's completely like there's no way to go out there. The water is reaching the dunes. We cannot do this. And so we're like, so sometimes bear with us. Like, this is a bit of a call to the audience. Bear with us if sometimes you see some of those cameras not fully perfect. Might have to do with that. Just saying.
Yeah. Like before launch, when I was going out there, I had to wait several hours after I wanted to set cameras so that the tide would retreat enough that I could safely make it like a mile and a half down the beach, because it was just utterly impossible otherwise. And even still, like the water, it's a continue. I have gone back to my car and seen my car getting hit by a bit of water before. and then
Oh.
suddenly moved my car. It's
I
yeah.
love this one. This is the behind the scenes video that you
Yeah.
did. Well,
Yeah.
behind the scenes / Starbase update video.
Behind the scenes. So speaking of going down the beach, D, you mentioned going down the beach. Oh, this is when the acoustics
Yeah, you see
team was
this.
setting up
This
their-
is fine, but D,
Yeah.
you have to go through the beach beforehand, right, to get to this
Yes.
place. And so if the beach is unusable, you cannot go through that, and so you cannot reach
Exactly.
our places. 'Cause
Yeah,
I
so
did not
before you-
understand this until these videos. Go ahead.
Yeah, before you walk a really long distance, you first have to drive a really long distance on the beach. And depending on the time, you will be driving through the salt water of the ocean. Just plain and simple. There's an area particularly right by the road that during a significant period of the time, the tide, I should say, there's water hitting there. And so it's about timing it right. You have to be safe. You have to make sure that you're not driving in deep water. Like that's a really important part of it. So at this point, I believe that is at the north lot. So that's in the opposite direction. South is the one I was at a fair bit more. That's where I really like to have my cameras set up. But yeah,
I'm going to throw you a curveball. Go ahead. Keep going. Well, talk about what we're seeing here behind the scenes.
Yeah, I was just saying this is at the outpost. So this was my first time watching a launch from Rocket Ranch's outpost, and it ended up being just a wonderful view surrounded by people that all care about spaceflight.
Yeah, it was very cool.
And so they've got a nice facility.
I like seeing the videos from Rocket Ranch. That's pretty cool. And the behind the scenes that you guys did was also awesome. I want to go back to you driving down the beach south, because one of the questions that we had in the chat goes back to something Alex said about environmental assessments, flying over land, landing in the Gulf, etc. Because if you drive too far south, then you're in Mexico. And I'm going to butcher this name. Ford Video Tube wants to know, and I don't know that we can answer this, but what are the overflight parameters for Mexico for SpaceX landing in the Gulf? Is that doable? D, go ahead.
So I believe they're talking about when they're actually landing like the ship from orbit.
Yeah.
Because we actually saw the track from that recently, and that's going to be a wild time because it is going to fly over Mexico. It is going to almost fly over Brownsville or somewhat fly over Brownsville, and it will fly over NSF's River Lot and Rocket Ranch's outpost and all the stuff in that area in order to come back and land. I see someone mentioning Space Mike. Absolutely. He was doing some interviews with us. I can't wait to see those. Really great guy. Yeah, so they have to overfly. So I'm sure in the same way that Mexico has like TFRs and their notice to mariner equivalency, I'm not sure how they're referred to there. The same way we see those for both the US and Mexico, I would expect we'll see those during reentry. And as far as sonic booms or anything like that, I'm not sure actually. We're getting a countdown?
We have a countdown.
What's that for?
It's a big clock.
Now I'm confused. Yeah, it's a really big clock.
Yeah. I'm going to get back. I'm going to get some more questions. We talked about Elon putting out we're going to water land Flight 7, potentially catch ship Flight 6. And John James wants to know, they're not going to risk the OLM until Tower 2 is ready. So are we looking at Tower 2, chopsticks, just catch hardware? Or are they building Tower 2 to be, I'm going to kind of change your question here, John. Are we building Tower 2 just for the catch and then we'll refit it for launches? What do you think about that, Alex?
I'm going to say the same thing that I said for Booster 12 catch. For a long, long time, people were saying, oh, they're going to delay Flight 5. They're going to wait until the second tower is built. Because, of course, they will not risk the OLM to land the booster on the chopsticks and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
If they're going to say they're going to be landing those, they're not going to be delaying that just because, second tower, whatever, right? That sounds probably a sensible thing to do, but think about SpaceX, right? What would you like the sort of like a balance between risk and early data gathering? What would you do, right? If you were SpaceX, SpaceX mentality is not. I mean, it's somewhat into safety, of course, but it's like we can abort the landing. Like the booster has ways of going away if it senses that it is not going the right direction, right? They have already done subscale testing with this stuff as well, and so they know what kind of thing will happen if it were to blow up and stuff like that. I think the same with the ship. If for whatever reason they attempted on Flight 8, right? Because that's what Elon has hinted at, and that's that's a flight where the second tower is still not available and not built out and whatever. Well, it is how it is. First tower, gonna go for the catch. Gonna catch it. Like one person reminded me actually the other day about this, because someone said, "How in the world they're gonna be doing the catch on Flight 8, but they're not going to orbit on Flight 7? Because to do the catch, you kind of have to go around the Earth and whatnot and be able to stay in orbit. Why are they doing that? And also on the first time, catching as well." And someone reminded that for Falcon 9, when they first did an RTLS, it was a return to flight mission. It was after multiple landing failures on drone ships and whatnot. It had everything against it to be able to be approved to return to the launch site. In that case, to a landing pad. Sure, it was a landing pad. There's no lot of critical hardware there, but it was the first time bringing it back to the Cape, to a military base with lots of people living nearby. And still, they nailed it. And they did it. Yeah. That's my take as well.
That's cool. Dee, didn't we talk about this a little earlier? We talked about offshore landing platforms. We were talking about, or was it? I can't remember who I talked to about this. We were talking about flying all over the world, point to point. It wasn't you. It was, I think it was Adrian and I were having this conversation. Glass Beads wants to know, what about offshore terminals?
They had Deimos and Phobos, which were like these huge like rigs that they were planning on using, and then they sort of started to work on them for a little bit, and then they scrapped them. So for the time being, that's not at all what SpaceX is looking at. And they're expanding like Starship, they're expanding the booster. They have to really focus on just being able to catch the boosters and being able to eventually catch the ships before they can worry about, but do we need a little bit extra performance from a drone ship landing? Because if they can get that extra performance from just doing a second launch and doing a propellant transfer, then why bother with the development of these very custom ships and a whole new, what essentially has to be a whole launch system out there? Because they need to safe the booster or safe the ship. And so I'm sure they have the numbers on how much propellant would be saved for given missions. If they could do that, they would need to figure out where they would land it. There are a lot of extra complications. Of course, if you're getting that centimeter precision when you're being caught with the chopsticks, that's a whole lot harder if you're floating in the middle of the ocean. They know where their tower is, and even their tower can move a little bit, even though it's into the ground. So there's so many complications brought on by the offshore platforms. It seems like they really just do not want to deal with that now, if they ever plan to eventually deal with that for Starship.
Great answer. It's one thing to catch a booster with a fixed tower. Imagine doing it with one in the ocean. You said something about the expansion of the program, and Zathariz was talking about, what do you think we're saying statements like, and you thought Starship was big. Alex, I'm coming to you. What's after Starship?
Galaxy ship.
It's going to be I figured you'd have fun with this one.
Yeah, I have no idea what's gonna be next. Elon has sort of floated the idea of doing like an 18-meter wide Starship instead. I have thoughts about that, not very good thoughts. Yeah, that's what I'm gonna say because we are running a little bit.
Block 50, right?
Yeah, it could be a block 50 of sorts, but yeah, it will be ginormous. It will be almost impractical. In that sense, it's not that it is impossible. It's just that I think it will be too big to handle, I guess, of a rocket. But yeah. Oh,
D disagrees.
Oh, what do I disagree with? Hold on.
with building a larger
How
Starship
big
kind of thing.
can Starship
Really, really
get?
big.
What's after Starship? D?
Oh.
What's next?
I think we're gonna see Starship for a long while. It's gonna get taller. The ship's gonna get taller. The booster's gonna get taller.
Yep.
Eventually, it might get wider too. I think one of the challenges of going to a wider booster would mean potentially chopsticks would need to be reworked. A lot of stuff on the tower. Whereas, okay, if they can add another section to the top of a tower, then they can work with a taller booster or a taller Starship, right? So by having this infrastructure, they've got the tower here at 39A. They've got 2 towers out at Starbase, and they're already changing up designs there. But I think they're going to want to avoid having to change the pad infrastructure as much as possible. So if over the next few versions we just see Starship get taller, I would think it'll be a decent amount of time before we actually see Starship get wider.
Yeah. Chris Nett wanted to know, Chris wanted to see 2 towers at Slick 37. Slick 37?
Yeah.
Slick 39A.
Yeah.
37?
No,
Are they building
37.
Both? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, it would be really cool to see it. We had the last Delta IV Heavy launch out of there earlier this year. There's a lot of discussions about what will be taking its place, to put it lightly.
Yeah.
So
when do you guys think, Twackers wants to know, when do we see a full Block 2 booster fly with the Block 2 ship? Real quick. D, go.
End of next year.
End of next year. Okay. Alex?
I think 2026, maybe end of next year. Yes, well, definitely either Flight 10 or beyond.
Yeah, I'm aiming for October-ish, 2026. If I had to put a guess in. RC Horseman, thank you so much, and everyone else for your support today. This has been a fun Flame Trench. Appreciate you. 20 Red Team memberships. RC, thank you so much. I'll see you in chat. I see you all the time. For my 2 co-hosts, we covered the gambit today, didn't we? Talked about a ton of stuff, especially Dragonfly, which was going to be a lot of fun. D, thank you so much for joining me today on the Flame Trench.
Of course, I'm always happy to be here, and now you can really see the VAB out here behind me. No better place to be than here in the Flame Trench.
And Alex, of course, bringing your knowledge to the Flame Trench, talking about Dragonfly. It's amazing. Thank you so much for doing this tonight.
It's been a pleasure, and hopefully we get to see all of this soon with another Starship launch. Gotta wait a little bit, but hey, we're gonna be out here waiting for that.
And so many people in chat. We didn't get to your questions, but thank you so much. Look, new launch directors, new flight engineers. We can't do this without your support. So thank you so much for joining NSF and becoming one of our members. You guys are amazing. You are awesome, and we love each and every one of you. Some other folks that we can't do this without are the folks behind the scenes. Kevin Michael Reed producing today's Flame Trench. Thank you, Kevin. You gonna say anything? Nope. Now he wants to keep his mouth shut. Go figure.
Ship 26.
No, that's going to bring him out.
Yes, Ship 26, best ship, even though it's gone. I'll say it for you, Kevin. There you go.
Oh, we need to talk about the best ship.
There you go. You guys pulled him out. You pulled him out from behind the scenes, and now he's talking. Coming up next, real quick, go watch after This Week in Spaceflight. Coming up next, you're going to go and watch that PLD Space interview with my 2 co-hosts here on Flame Trench today. And coming up next, This Week in Spaceflight. And don't forget, Shop.NASASpaceflight.com. Shop.NASASpaceflight.com. I can't say it enough. Amazing merch. We love it. I can't get over this stuff. You should see my wife's walking around with her sweatshirt on. It's amazing. Thank you, viewers. Thank you, guys. Everybody. This was a lot of fun. Remember, until next time, I'm Gene Rowley for NSF. Dream big. Keep your eyes on the stars.
And here we go.
We have liftoff. Propulsion continues to be normal.
RCPA chamber pressure looks good.
Following up. Roger, Atlantis.
Water towers, fly! Yes! Payload down to nominal.
Fighting downside FD off. Bring in FD off. Off. It's orange!
145! Oh my god! Oh my god!
Decollage.
Look at this!
Put that in the big bag, Eagle.
343 unfolds to go. Indeed. We rise together, back to the moon and beyond.
The methane will be igniting in the flare, correct?
Thanks. You bet. We don't need any more of these.